It's hot enough today that I'm sweating. I just want you to know I've never advised anyone to bake their camera. Don't put it in the oven. Don't leave it in the sun. Some people have said that putting a camera in the sun is not a realistic test. And unfortunately, it is actually quite common here in Arizona. And it gets to this whole point of testing and what is actually realistic. It's hard to say. The realest thing is a real shoot, but oftentimes you don't want to expose yourself to that risk on a real shoot. So I thought today I would do something a little bit more realistic. Vlogging, walking, talking, exposing the camera to the sunlight. It's cooking right now. So we're on the Panty Boy Lumix G9 Mark II, Leica 9mm, Tony 1.7, and we're shooting 4K, 24, 422, 10-bit, 150 megabits per second, pretty lightweight, all things considered. Really, I find it to be that perfect balance. You can shoot ProRes, you can shoot RAW, you can go to the extremes, the 400 megabits per second. I like to keep the file sizes lower so that I can save more space on a hard drive and less memory card space, but still getting the maximum quality, or at least enough quality for the project. Now, from my understanding, this camera has no fan at all, which is kind of interesting. If you look at something like the Lumix GH6, that has a huge fan, thermals, exhaust on the back of it, right behind the screen, which is, I really like the screen on the GH6. But then you look at something like the S5 Mark II, and that has a different fan design, but also built to perform for video. But the G9 Mark II, from my understanding, has none of that. So if you think about it, the more this camera cooks, if it's exposed to sunlight, UV light, whatever it might be, it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. It has no way to exhaust, to vent. It can't cool itself down. And so that heat load just builds and builds and builds. Whereas a lot of other electronics have some kind of fan, some kind of way to dissipate the heat. So while they do heat up and they get hot, they reach that kind of breaking point where they get hot and then they can kind of keep themselves at that higher temperature for longer without overheating, where this Lumix G9 Mark II, as well as many other cameras, the Sony cameras are susceptible to this, where they get too hot and they can't do anything unless you have some kind of external fan, which I did bring with me. So this is the Ulanzi fan. It just clips right to the back of the camera, and it's got a built-in battery, so it's not as ideal as an internal fan. That's loud. It's not as ideal as an internal fan, but it is a solution that does work based on some of my initial testing, and I brought it with me just in case. It's not on the camera right now. So I'm letting the camera be exposed to the elements, as you would do if you're filming outside, and we'll see if I end up needing this or not. But again, I'm not running the camera in that high open gate. You know, I'm not shooting 60, I'm not shooting 120, I'm not pushing it to its limits. I'm just using a video mode that, for the most part, is kind of general purpose. This is what I would use for a lot of projects, and I feel like that's a good place to be. Find the mode that works reliably and consistently in the most conditions. That's what I'm after. I want to figure out what mode can I safely put this camera in to where I'm not going to have problems unless it's a really extreme fringe case scenario. If you look at page 779 of the Lumix G9 Mark II user manual, Panasonic does spell out the kind of continuous video recording scenarios, the temperatures that are allowed, and they're actually quite limiting. I'm surprised this isn't information I've seen anyone else really talk about. If you want to shoot video with the G9 Mark II, prepare to be limited according to Panasonic's own documentation. It's there in black and white. You can take a look at it. If you look at places like B&H, this camera is touted as being a great hybrid photo and video camera, even though the video specs aren't highlighted in the same way that they are on something like the Lumix GH6 or the Lumix S5 Mark II. The Lumix G9 Mark II is talked about as if it's a video camera. And a lot of people are having luck with it. They're shooting video on it. I've been shooting video on it. It works great until it doesn't. And I really want to figure out, what are those limitations? What is that breaking point? What conditions are safe? What conditions are unsafe? And what can we actually get out of this thing? Because a lot of times when you're just looking at specs from any camera company, Canon, Sony, Nikon, Lumix, you name it. You're looking at specs on B&H probably, and it just lists, here's everything it can do. But it very rarely will spell out the limitations unless they're hard-coded into the camera. So those 30-minute record limits that we used to have on all these cameras back in the day, that was a fixed coded thing. You cannot record for longer than 30 minutes on a lot of the older cameras. Nowadays, with the thermal management and the overheating, it's very ambiguous, it's very arbitrary. Sometimes you can record continuous, sometimes you can't. How do you know what's safe and what's not? And it's really hard to know what's gonna work because there's so many factors. People say, well, you test this. What if it's a dummy battery? What if you're shooting 60? What if, you know, you're running to an external monitor and you're recording there and you're not recording internally? What if? There's always what ifs, and it's so hard to test and track down all those scenarios because really everyone shoots a little bit different. The circumstances that apply to me here in Phoenix, Arizona are very different than they are elsewhere in the world, or maybe there are similarities. Maybe what is a priority for me isn't a priority for you. Right now, I have no rigging on this camera. There's no monitor, there's no HDMI, there's nothing plugged in other than a microphone. And that's like bare bones. A lot of people want to rig it out. I'm one of those people. If I'm shooting video, I want a monitor, I want a battery to charge it, and those can also compound those variables in determining what's causing the overheating problem. I don't know if you can see that, but it's 81 degrees Fahrenheit in Phoenix right now. And I've been recording for about 10 minutes, leaving it mostly open to the sun, but we do have a nice breeze coming by. That's helping us out. So really just want to see, is this a safe mode to record in? Is this 4K 422, 10-bit, 150? Is that safe? Oh, hi fire truck. Do I want more graphic visual displays in the UI? Probably not. The UIs these days, they're cluttered. I've got aperture, I've got shutter, I've got codec, I've got audio meters. I've got so much stuff on these screens that I don't really want another temperature dial saying how hot these cameras are and what the internals are like. But if they're gonna keep building them this way, maybe that's something we do need. It would be helpful to know, am I pushing things? Am I getting close? They have a little warning that pops up that'll say it's getting hot, but it's not a precise number. It's not a range. It's just, hey, be careful. You're getting hot. Well, how hot am I? What's my temperature? Maybe just let me know that. Give me the temperature. Let me check it somewhere in the camera so I can see how hot we're getting and if I'm getting close to the danger zone or not. But really what I want more than that is for these cameras to be designed with more users, more scenarios, more of these circumstances in mind. All I want is the perfect camera. If I think of something like my smartphone, I have an iPhone designed by Apple. It has overheated. Every electronic is capable of overheating, but those limits, those circumstances are so much rarer than what we're finding with cameras these days. It seems like the cameras are being pushed and pushed and pushed to their limit, like we're overclocking everything and not really designing them in a way to where they are safer and more reliable to use in a vast array of circumstances. I don't think it's fair to keep pushing the specs further and further and further and not take into consideration the unreliable nature that we're building into them. Sony, Canon, Lumix, Nikon, they should be designed with all of their codecs, their bit rates, their resolutions, all of those formats should be taken into mind. If it's marketed as a hybrid video and photo camera and you say on the spec sheet, here's what it can do, then let's build them so they can actually do those things reliably, consistently, so I don't have to think about it. Because at the end of the day, when you ask, hey, what can this camera do? And it says, here's the list of everything it can do, but results may vary. That's a very hard situation to be in because you can't trust it. I want phase detect. I want it to work. It's working right now. I hope it's keeping me in focus. It's a very helpful, useful feature, but I don't want phase detect at the cost of reliability and performance elsewhere. I don't want to have to worry about the camera overheating and causing problems for a shoot. So people will say, well, just buy a real camera. Go to buy the GH6, that has a fan. I have a GH6, it does not have phase detect. Stop playing whack-a-mole with our products that we're recommending, because the moment you say you need one thing, but you also need something else, people will point and pivot, and ultimately you end up with a camera and they say, oh, well, you need to buy this $50,000 camera to do all that stuff you want to do, and that's not true. All I is the GH6 with phase detect. So I know that's possible. I'm sure it will come eventually in a GH7 or whatever it might be. But I also want the G9 Mark II to be the best version of itself. But all things considered, it does do video quite well, aside from this one minor limitation that hasn't even hit me in this recording. I've been going for quite a while. I'm not seeing any warning symbols or anything like that, so that's giving me some nice peace of mind. I stopped to hydrate, getting a little warm. Me personally, not the camera. Thankfully today, I'm actually being quite impressed with the performance of the Lumix G9 Mark II. No overheating warnings or issues so far. Again, I'm recording in that 4K 422 10-bit 150 mode. So it's not taking full advantage of the open gate sensor capabilities that this camera has, but I'm also outside. And maybe if that's the balance I find, where some modes I prefer for outdoor shooting and some modes I prefer for indoor shooting, that's not all that bad, all things considered. Considering I still get phase detect, considering I still get dynamic range boost, I still get the great IBIS that the Lumix cameras are known for, and I still get to use all my great micro four third lenses. Of course, you could always buy a different camera that's more suited for your needs. I do like the future potential of L mount and some of those lenses, but I really want there to be more. If I'm gonna go full frame Lumix, I need a really healthy, robust lens selection, and thankfully, a lot of that is coming. Like and Panasonic and Sigma and a few others making L mount lenses is great. I want to see more of that. And then once we get some really great solid options in the same way that Micro Four Thirds has had years and years and years to build up that huge selection of lenses, I think I probably will make the switch to full frame. But I also want to make sure I'm investing in a camera and a platform that can do everything I need it to and then some, and is actually pushing things forward and making things better, not just trading one thing for another with no meaningful difference or upgrade. And that's what I was hoping for in the G9 Mark II, that it would be an upgrade to the GH6 by adding phase detect. I think that's worthwhile. All things considered, it is really nice. It's doing a good job. It's staying within operating temperature for everything I'm putting it through today. But in the back of my mind, I'm always gonna be wondering, what scenario am I gonna find myself in where I need to pull out the GH6 for that fan, the built-in thermal management that's so well done on the GH6, and then I have to lose phase detect from the G9 Mark II. Like I said, I think things will continue to get better, but sometimes it also feels like for every step forward we take, we also take one step back. I'll continue testing and trying different things, experimenting with different configurations on the G9 Mark II, and I probably still will keep using it for work and pushing its limits to see when I hit the next breaking point and what that might be. I think tomorrow I'll actually shoot with the G9 Mark II fully rigged out with the monitor, using HDMI, with the Anton Titan base battery, charging it back up, really rig it out for video, use it for a shoot, but limit my recording to 4K, 422, 10-bit, 24 frames a second. And I think that limitation hopefully will serve me well. It's been working great today, no external monitor or anything. I'm not getting any issues. I haven't had to pull out the fan, the Ulanzi fan. So I'm hopeful for tomorrow that the shoot can go well. I will bring a GH6 with me just in case, but I think that'll be a better use case test, very similar to the last time I had the G9 Mark II overheat, but that was using open gate. So I think hopefully with that one change, we'll see if I can get some more promising results. I think they're taking out a bush. I can feel that the camera is quite warm in my hand. So there is a rise in temperature, but it's not giving me any warning, so that's good. And believe it or not, this is the nice time of year here. It gets way hotter in the summer. One flaw in my backyard testing that I'm coming to realize is leaving a camera stationary in one position to let it bake in the sun is not a good representation of what happens in reality, where a lot of the time the camera is moving, you're moving it through the air, you're constantly giving it some kind of wind, if that makes any sense. Right now, I'm walking through the air, and that heat transfer can go from the camera to the air as I'm getting this kind of cooling method, walking around, moving the camera, just even being in handheld mode. That sounds kind of silly, but I do think it makes quite a noticeable difference, because I can feel it too. If you imagine just walking around a cool breeze, that airflow feels really nice and cools you down, and I think the same effect is happening to the camera. So it's not quite fair for me to leave it sitting in the sun, although I didn't really have another choice. I was actively shooting with the GH6, so the G9 Mark II had to just be sitting there in the sun. But a better, more realistic use case is probably this of what I'm doing now, where the camera's having some movement, getting some airflow. Someone mentioned you can get umbrella shades for hot shoes, and that is somewhat of a good solution. I think keeping this camera shaded will go a long way in terms of just making sure it doesn't overheat, especially if you're using those lighter weight modes. Not the 120, not even 60, you know, just your standard 24 or 30. You'll probably be fine, especially if you do have some kind of shade. Now, do I recommend a hot shoe umbrella? Maybe, but other times, just a little bit of shade, you know, some other way would be fine. In the shade of a tree, in the shade of a building, and you're probably good. It gives me peace of mind that I can use phase detect outdoors for an extended period of time in certain modes and not risk overheating. And if I do push that limit, I have that Ulanzi fan that I can also take advantage of to help me out a little bit. And who knows, maybe one day you'll see me with an umbrella on my hot shoe. The desert can be quite colorful, but if I have to hear, just go buy a real video camera, I don't want to hear that. This is a real video camera. If you're gonna tell me you can shoot 422 10-bit, you can shoot open gate, you're gonna give me shutter angle, all things I love, don't take them away. But to me, that's a video camera. And I want it to work reliably. Maybe if we walk faster, that will cool the camera more. Gotta move fast if you want to keep cool. I hope you're loving the Panty Boy stabilization. I don't even have E-Stab turned on. Now we're going high E-Stab, full E-Stab on the Panty Boy Lumix G9 Mark II, Leica 9mm, Tone 1.7. This should just be butter, I would assume. This looks like, is this like a gimbal? Is this a Steadicam shot from a movie? Is this Hollywood right now? Look how good this looks, I think. I don't know. I can't tell what it looks like. You have to tell me. Does it look good? Does it look bad? Cropped in a little bit, but off the 9mm, doesn't matter. No sweat. Walking, talking, working up a sweat, getting hot, camera is staying cool. That is what I love to see. We're not boosting. Boosting is when you want it to look like a tripod. We're using the E stabilization set to high, and that's in the menu said for walking. Is this the gimbal killer? Is this the Steadicam killer? Is this the game changer that we need it to be? I've never used it before. I didn't use E stabilization on the GH6 because I found it kind of warped and wonked, kind of strange. I never really liked it. So I just used the standard IBIS stabilization. But this E-Stab on the G9 Mark II is supposed to be improved. Is it like a drone circling around my body? Still not overheating, still no warning, so that's really good. There's always a way. We can work through these things. You know, when you have a disagreement in any kind of relationship, you talk it out, you communicate, and you work through things. One little problem, it's not the end, but we do need to talk about it. It has to be addressed. We can't just ignore the problem and hope that it goes away. Healthy relationships are built on communication, and walking shots are improved with stabilization. At least, let's hope. Is this cinematic? Is this Hollywood right now? On the flip side of all of this, I am glad that we've moved past the 30-minute fake arbitrary timers that just turn things off just because you've reached a time limit. I don't think that's the solution. I don't want to go back to that. I like where we're being able to use these cameras to their fullest, but I think there's some balance in between. So let me know what you think. Subscribe to the channel and follow for more videos.